Lawrence Norden is on the line with us. He is the Deputy Director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center and co-author of a study, The National Voting Machine Crisis is Upon Us and It's Affecting Elections. You can read all about it over at brennancenter.org, B-R-E-N-N-A-N center.org. And Larry, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
It's a pleasure. So tell us about your study.
Yeah, so we've been hearing for the past couple of years from election officials that many of them are concerned about the age of their machines. Folks may remember that after the 2000 election, which was kind of a disaster, in part because of machine problems, Congress provided about $2 billion for machines to be replaced around the country. Those machines are now reaching the end of their projected lifespan. We decided to take a comprehensive look at how big a problem this was. And what we found was, I think, troubling, and the problem is more far-reaching than I expected. The machines that we're using today, purchased since 2000, generally have a projected lifespan of between 10 and 15 years. And in 2016, 43 states will be using electronic voting machines that are at least 10 years old, and 14 will be using machines that are at least 15 years old.
And these are old Windows-based, basically cheap computers, aren't they?
Yeah, that is often correct. So we're really talking about the machines that were purchased, for the most part, are running on laptop technology from the 1990s. They're using very often old software, like, if you can believe it, Windows 2000, Windows XP. This is software that is no longer serviced by Microsoft. So So
it's absolutely insecure. Anybody could walk up and stick a USB card in, or if they're wired together, if that network is in any way on the internet. Not to mention just the reliability of these things and the fact that they don't provide data trails and that we don't have access to the software itself because of so-called proprietary,
Yeah, there are many problems with having such old systems, and one for sure is, the software that was created. It was created before a time of a lot of the kinds of hacking and other attacks.
Wasn't the easiest answer to do? Ireland tried out our voting machines for one election cycle, and then they sold them for scrap metal. The rest of Europe votes on paper. Canada votes on paper. Why don't we go back to paper?
Well, I mean, to a large extent, we have been going back to paper. Immediately after the 2000 election, there was a big move towards these touchscreen, what we call direct recording electronic machines,
right? DREs.
DREs that are, they look a little bit like old iPads or something like that. But right. We moved away from that recently, and more places are voting on paper ballots that are then read by these optical scan machines.
Right.
I think just doing what is done in Europe and just having somebody vote on a piece of paper and counting them up can be a little difficult because our elections are so much more complicated. We have so many more contests. In Los Angeles County in a single year, they might have 300 contests that people are voting on.
Well, on the other hand, their elections where they've got proportional representation. I mean, that can be. Well, actually, yeah, you're right. That's not quite as complex as ranked voting. I was thinking of, but they may take 3 or 4 days to count the votes, and people just kind of wait around for those 3 or 4 days.
Right.
It's I lived in Germany back in the 80s. They would have an election. They would call the election within 5 minutes of the polls closing because the exit polls were never more than a tenth of a point off. But it still took 4 days for the official results to come in because they had to count the votes, and all these civil servants just basically got 4 days off their normal jobs, and they became vote counters. We used to know when elections ended. My mom used to, when I was a kid in the 50s. I mean, literally, when I was 7 years old, I go down and watch my mom, signing people in to vote, and people were voting on paper and sometimes the mechanical machines, the old mechanical machines. But our election polls were always accurate until around 1998 or 2000, and all of a sudden our polls went to hell. And it seems like that correlated with the time when the electronic voting machines came along. Have you guys looked into that? And have you looked into the charges that in the 2004 election that Ken Blackwell had the individual districts around Ohio send their tabulated totals to a server in Kentucky or Tennessee? I'm pretty sure it was Kentucky, that was owned and run by Karl Rove, and it was the one on which the George W. Bush emails, the 5 million missing emails, were handled. And then they sent that information back to Ohio, and Blackwell said, "Here's the numbers Kerry lost."
Well,
or am I just talking total conspiracy theory stuff here?
Well, what I will say is, look, I mean, if you want to talk about paper ballots, the U.S. has a history with them too, and
of ballot stuffing,
boxes,
sure.
Years ago, and throwing ballot boxes into the river. I think there's always the potential, if you have insiders who are involved, for fraud, and the question is, what steps do you take to prevent it? And even if you have a paper record, if you have some kind of paper trail that you can look at and compare to the official results, there are various steps that can be taken to make sure that they're accurate. And certainly the Brennan Center has spent a lot of time looking into that and looking at what procedures are the best procedures for ensuring that you're accounting for every vote and that you're counting every vote. And regardless of what system you're using, we should make sure that we're doing that and doing it in as transparent a way as possible. But I don't see us moving anytime soon to a system that doesn't rely on computers to some extent in tallying results. And the question is, are those machines going to work or not? And if we don't invest some money soon, the answer is going to be not. And what I'm particularly concerned about is what we are seeing lately. We did it in our study. We looked at Virginia. We look a little bit at Ohio and Minnesota, where states haven't yet provided the money to buy new machines. Wealthier counties are buying new machines, and poorer counties are left relying on older machines that probably should be taken out of service. So
we're going to see, once again, poor, largely minority areas where people are having to wait in line 10 hours because half the voting machines have broken down, and affluent white neighborhoods where the counties themselves have appropriated the money to replace the machines, and the average line wait is going to be 20 minutes.
Well, I mean, there is a danger of that, and I should say some of the counties that can't afford to buy are smaller rural counties as well. So there are lots of different ways that this can play out, but certainly money is a big factor in all of it. When you're talking about lost votes, we do have a pretty definitive report from MIT and Harvard after the 2012 election that said between 500 and 700,000 people were not able to vote because of long lines. Those votes just weren't counted. And the longer we let these problems, it's just going to get worse the longer we allow them to go, because the machines get older, they break down more.
I agree. Larry, we only have 30 seconds left. I'm curious if you've been following this lawsuit situation in Kansas about the anomalies, that statistician. You think there's anything to that?
I haven't really been following it closely, but one thing I will say is with all of this, I think transparency is better.
Yeah.
It's better because if there's
that's what she's suing for, is she wants the data.
Yeah. Look, and here in New York, we found problems with voting systems where the results were wrong, and we were able to get the underlying data and show it. So I think in general, we should make that kind of information public.
Yeah, this is the beating heart of democracy. It's the most important thing out there, and it seems like we're giving it such short shrift. You guys are doing great work. Deputy Director of the Democracy Program with the Brennan Center, co-author of the study, The National Voting Machine Crisis is Upon Us, Lawrence Norden. BrennanCenter.org is the website. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Tom.
Great having you with us.